Welcome to the system, everyone's a victim. Doesn't matter if you're black or white, it hates you all. Here inside the system, violence is a symptom. Fighting for what's right, but somehow everyone is wrong. Welcome to the system, everyone's a victim. Doesn't matter if you're black or white, it hates you all. Here inside the system, violence is a symptom. Fighting for what's right, but somehow everyone is wrong. Welcome to the world, everybody. I'ma paint you black and white. I'ma make you hate each other so that everyone will fight. I'ma give you all religion, let the righteous find the light. But I will also give you science to oppose the word of Christ. And I'ma give you borders, they're imaginary lines. If you cross them, go to war and win when everybody dies. And I'ma give you money that you'll value more than life. And let the 1% have everything while you fight to survive. And then I'll give you politics, I'll call it left and right. And while you divide yourselves, I will conquer both the sides. Can't you see? I'm the system, my whole purpose is the...
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to point out the contradiction, Mr. Chairman, that we're having a vote on a bill to limit speech, and we move to...
We're under point of order if you have a point of order question, but you can't make a statement. We're on the voting. Do you have a point of order question? Yes, Chairman Clemens.
A point of order question, Mr. Speaker, is if we're going to vote on a bill that limits speech and ideas and the teaching of those ideas, why are we cutting off debate on that very bill?
Mr. Clerk, can you read the House rules on previous?
It seems like we're just making bills to say we did something. So Representative Grill says it addresses all threats to schools. The threat that we need to be talking about are the mass shootings that have happened recently that have plagued our community. And so a bill that does not mention easy access to weapons of war, I don't think is addressing the threats to our schools. A bill that does not address the proliferation of guns in our communities is not addressing the threats to our schools. A bill that does not even mention these words is not really about the threats to our schools, but it's a PR move by the majority party. Thank you.
Representative Dixie.
You may or may not know this, but my wife is a librarian. And the process that you describe of how they intake books is not how it happens. They take a book in. There's a website that she goes to on every book. And she sees if it's grade level, what the book is, what's its appropriate, what audience it's meant for. And she teaches in a pre-K through five school. So I'm not saying you didn't talk to librarians, but I think you need to talk to more than two. And also, school board members aren't educators. I think that if we have a penchant here for creating bills and legislation, and we don't talk to the stakeholders. And that's a problem. And I think that if you really talk with librarians, you would see that we've created an entire new workload for them that's unnecessary. But it also shows that we're not listening to our teachers. That's why one reason it's hard for us to continue to recruit and retain teachers. So when you have these bills that are put in there are checks and balances in place already in order to show this law is not needed. Because if there's a book that my wife that she thinks that is not appropriate, she sends it back. Every year they go through old books, discard them. Every year she has to do that. She spends an inordinate amount of time at school, after school, trying to go through these books that she's not compensated for. It keeps us away from family time, things that she wants to do on her own time. So I think we need to really, really think about what the intent and the unintended consequences of these laws are before we put them into place.
Their friends were at the Covenant School when the shooting started, and now Nashville Elementary students want state leaders to know they're scared.
I want to live as long as I possibly can.
Glendale Elementary students wrote letters to the governor asking for gun reform in Tennessee, then hand-delivered them to his home.
Just of what happened to Covenant, I just don't want anyone else to, die.
Thank you.
Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the sponsor, this bill is trying to put the words "In God We Trust" on our state seal. But everything we've done this session has been an affront to what God calls us to do. I believe that this proposal to put "In God We Trust" on our state seal is using the Lord's name in vain. I think of Isaiah 10 that says, woe to those who pass unjust laws that hurt the poor and rob them of their rights. I think of Micah 6:8, what does the Lord require of us but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly? I think of Luke 4:18, where it says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, release to the captives. If we look at the word of God, there's over 2,000 scriptures that talk about how we should treat the poor and vulnerable. And we're not doing that in this body. So we're going to use God's name. We're going to put it on a seal to pat ourselves on the back, but we're doing everything against God, God's will, and who he called us to care for, which is the orphan, which is the widow, which are the vulnerable of our state, which is the blood of these children who are killed in Nashville at Covenant Elementary School, crying out to us. And so you want to put in God we trust on the state seal, but I believe that God would call us to do more than just to do a slogan. God would call us to do justice. God would call us to do righteousness. God would call us to care for the least of these in our state.
Out of order.
And so to my colleague, Representative Holsclaw, I ask that you withdraw this bill and don't just use God as a slogan, but use God as a way to how we're going to legislate in this body. Use God to examine the moral framework of the policies we're passing. We live in a state where it's easier to get a gun than it is to get an adequate education. That is not of God. We live in a state where we worship the NRA and at the expense of our babies.
Representative Jones, we're on the bill. You're going off topic. Out of order. Those in the balcony, just so we know, if you could please refrain from making noise, then we will be good. If you could please do that. We would not want to have to remove anybody. That's not what we want to do. Representative Jones, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it is this body that's trying to use God's name in vain and put God's sanction on the injustices that is happening here. Let me read from Jeremiah 22. Thus says the Lord, go down to the house of the king of Judah, or sexton, and speak there this word and say, hear the word of the Lord, O king of Judah, sitting on the throne of David, you and your servants and your people who enter these gates. Thus says the Lord, act with justice and righteousness and deliver from the hand of the oppressor anyone who has been robbed, and do no wrong or violence to the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place. For if you will indeed obey this word, then through the gates of this house shall enter kings who sit on the throne of David, riding in chariots and on horses, they, their servants, and their people. Let's go. If we want to use God, let's talk about God. Let's talk about a Jesus who said, that which you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. Let's talk about the God in the Old Testament who said, the blood cries out. The blood cries out of those 3 9-year-olds who were slain in this city, and this body chose to do nothing about it. God is calling us to do something more than just
Representative Jones, you're getting off topic. Pearson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. We all got to preach from time to time, because the art of preaching is professing a gospel in the Christian faith or in any faith about love and justice. You have brought before this hallowed house a piece of legislation to encourage the governor to submit a design of the Great Seal of the state of Tennessee by July 1st, 2025, that incorporates the language, quote, in God we trust. Professing, as I assume you are trying to do, that here in the state of Tennessee, it is in God we trust. A God, as my colleague spoke about, who cares how we act and how we treat the most marginalized. A God who cares about how we act and how we treat the poor, those who've been pushed to the periphery. In God we trust is what we are seeking here, to encourage our governor to add to our Great Seal of the state of Tennessee. And I have to wonder, which God are we trusting in? Because we all have different faiths and backgrounds and traditions and beliefs. And I welcome the clergy here from around the nation who believe in a God that forces some people to march for justice. a God that forces some folks not to silence the voices of people who are marginalized and pushed to the periphery. So it is interesting that we are seeking to put "In God We Trust" on our Tennessee Great Seal, and we haven't even had a conversation about which God we're talking about. And some people here have these gods that they worship. Some of us have these gods that we bow down to. Some people here have these gods that we love and that we idolize, that silence voices and shun the poor and pass legislation to silence the majority. Some people have this God that they worship, and I think in this house of conversation and this hallowed house of debate, there should have been more conversation about which God we were putting our trust in. Because I'm concerned.
Representative Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield to a series of questions?
Chairman Reagan.
I yield.
Representative Jones.
Thank you. Representative Reagan, do you not believe that college students are mature enough to talk about issues like race and systemic racism, some of the concepts you want to ban and have tried to prohibit being discussed at the college level?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the representative, I believe in God. All else is settled by facts and data.
Representative Jones.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't. That's not an answer. Let's try again. Do you believe that college students are mature enough to handle conversations about systemic racism and the history of oppression in America that you're trying to prohibit under this bill?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have addressed your question already, sir.
Representative Jones.
So we're playing not answer. Okay. Representative Reagan, what type, you call this the Freedom of Expression bill, but it's prohibiting concepts from being discussed freely on college campuses, and it's instituting a rogue reporting process where students can report professors for teaching this list of 16, 17 issues. Can you explain the impetus for this bill? What is the origin? What motivated you to write this bill? It seems like it's based off of white fragility, fears of teaching the truth of history. What was your reason for writing this bill?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill was brought to me by a dean of college education who I worked with in addition to another university also contributed to this bill. That was my motivation, sir.
Representative Jones.
Can you name that person? Who asked you to bring this legislation?
Chairman Reagan.
I would prefer not to, sir. That's between me and the person who brought it to me. If you wish to discuss that in private, I'd be glad to do it.
Representative Jones.
Thank you. Representative Reagan, you grew up at a time where America was segregated. Under this bill, we can't teach that history. So I'm just trying to figure out how will we be honest about our history if you're prohibiting any concepts about America's racist history. It says here we can't talk about any type of unequal system that ascribe character traits, values, moral, ethical codes, privileges onto a certain race. You say that we can't talk about the history of struggle in America. Can you explain how we would talk about these issues and why you're so fearful about even college students discussing them?
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your assertion is incorrect, sir. It does not prohibit discussing these.
Representative Jones.
Representative Reagan, this is under prohibited concepts. These are things that, according to this bill, under present law, the following concepts are defined as divisive concepts. And under this law, there's a reporting process where students can report professors for teaching these concepts. This sounds like fascism. This sounds like authoritarianism. This does not sound like democracy or freedom. And so again, this bill is very troubling to anybody who believes in constitutional rights and who believes in America's promise of freedom of expression. You are targeting professors and college students from talking about race and from talking about the history of America. I think it is shameful what you're trying to do. And I'm trying to get an answer as to see what is the origin of this bill, but you're being evasive because I think that you don't even know what the purpose of this bill is besides to feed into this racist narrative that you've been promoting all session. And so I would just urge this body, if you really believe in this, don't play games with the people. Take a
Representative
vote.
Jones, that's another statement. We're asking questions. We're not going down that road. Well, you better make sure it's a question. Representative Jones.
It's a question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Clerk, can you read for the Speaker residency requirements in order to represent a district?
Very good, Representative Jones. That's a nice one. Congratulations to you. Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
This is a deeply concerning bill because it is continuing a pattern of practice that is harmful to all people. When you begin to attack education and educational institutions that seek to tell the truth. I'll read some of this bill because I've got some folks here from Memphis and folks who are watching who need to see what the Tennessee General Assembly is calling divisive. An individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. This is to prevent white folks in particular from being told they had anything to do with enslavement. A meritocracy which does not exist because a society that committed genocide against Native Americans, enslaved black African American people for over 250 years, cannot be a meritocracy because we didn't all start at the same place. But you will not be able to say a meritocracy is inherently racist or sexist or designed by a particular race or sex to oppress another sex, despite the fact that in the United States of America's Constitution that we all swear an oath on, black people were considered 3/5 of a person. Only rich white men could vote, not women. But you tell us that those things we wouldn't be able to talk about.
Mr. Speaker, I want to welcome the people back to the people's house. I want to welcome democracy back to the people's house. That on last Thursday, members of this body tried to crucify democracy, but today we stand as a witness of a resurrection of a movement of a multiracial democracy that no unjust decision will stand. I'm hopeful for the days ahead for Tennessee, not because of the actions of this body, but because of the actions of the people out there and the thousands gathered outside this chamber right now who are calling for something better, who responded to your attacks on democracy with an attack of a mass movement for social justice and racial justice and economic justice to restore the heart of our state. And so I want to thank you all, not for what you did, but for awakening the people of this state, particularly the young people. Thank you for reminding us that the struggle for justice is fought and won in every generation. And so the people of Tennessee, I stand with you. We will continue to be your voice here, and no expulsion, no attempt to silence us will stop us, but it will only galvanize and strengthen our movement. And we continue to show up in the people's house. Power to the people.
This afternoon's vote is unprecedented, but so was the action taken to expel members of the legislature. Voters in District 52 elected Justin Jones to be their voice at the State House, and that voice was taken away this past week. So let's give them their voice back, and I'd call on this body to vote unanimously right now to do just that. Thank you.
Votes are in. Mr. Clerk, close the machines, take the vote. Ayes 36.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to point out the contradiction, Mr. Chairman, that we're having a vote on a bill to limit speech, and
Chairman
we move
Clemens,
to...
We're under point of order if you have a point of order question, but you can't make a statement. We're on the voting. Do you have a point of order question? Yes, Chairman Clemens.
My point of order question, Mr. Speaker, is if we're going to vote on a bill that limits speech and ideas and the teaching of those ideas, why are we cutting off debate on that very bill?
Mr. Clerk, can you read the House rules on previous